I had to clean the stovetop the other day.
Did you have to?
Well, okay, so the oven's not worked for a little bit, and we mostly use the toaster oven / air fryer in the summer because it makes the house less hot than the real oven does.
Understandable.
So like the oven's been broken for a bit, and the guy was coming to look at the oven to see what was wrong with it. And the top, like I like to think that a thin layer of grease on the top of the stovetop helps to protect the enamel of the stovetop.
It's a lubricant, it's a sealant, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. It's keeping the bad stuff out and the good stuff in, right? It's like wax for your car.
Yes, you're detailing your stovetop.
My wife possibly had some different ideas about the level of filth she was willing to expose outsiders to.
I'm familiar with this phenomenon. Well, I get it. Actually, I am with your wife on that one. Like, I also don't want to. So, yes.
I'm generally pretty tidy, but in this case, this is a place where, I like to let let life find a way. So anyway, I cleaned it off, and that stuff that gets like the hard baked on kind of like they're like dark spots. Usually it's like if you spill something with some fat in it, it'll get cooked on there if the burner is hot, and then it's really hard to get off. So I went to the internet, as one does, to find out how to remove these, hopefully with chemistry or something that wouldn't involve me scrubbing for 3 hours. And somebody on the internet said, hey, if you have a Le Creuset, an enameled Dutch oven, like one of those Dutch ovens you have, and you bought their fancy, unnecessary for the Le Creuset Dutch oven, but totally necessary for other enameled cookware, cleaner, which is, I think, just something that's more basic than like baking soda, but less basic than like, lithium hydroxide or something. It takes that stuff right off.
Okay.
So I degreased the top, and I wetted the stuff on the sponge, and I put it on there, and I rubbed it on and let it sit for a few minutes. And then it basically, like all of it, but the very hardest on there, wipes off, and it looks brand new for the first time in the 5 years that we've had this oven.
That sounds fun. I was hoping some beakers might be involved here, some Bunsen burners, like chemistry outing, but this still.
So I looked into it further to see what was going on here, and it turns out basic stuff takes off burned off charred stuff, and the more burned on charred it is, the more basic it needs to be. And in this case, I mean basic as in the opposite of acidic, not basic as in like
Bro, why is your cleaner so basic?
Yeah,
like this is a very chemistry ignorant question. Is alkaline another term?
Alkaline,
for that?
also basic.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So like
they're not synonymous. You can't just say like this is an alkaline.
No, alkaline and basic mean the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Alkaline is probably the correct term for basic.
Okay. Because as you have identified, sometimes hard to use the word basic in another context. In conversation.
Nobody wants to be basic unless you're cleaning off hard stains
or coating on an apple too. Well, not even then.
Yeah, but anyway. So like I got the soft brush out, like the soft dish brush, put this stuff on, scrubbed it just a little bit, and it pops right off, and the stovetop looks super clean. And he came out and he looked at the pilot light, and he's like, well, in an old oven, this would have been about 5-minute fix, and I have the thing for it in my car. But since this is all got computers and shit up in it, I'm going to order the parts. It's going to be here in a week, and I'll come put them in about 5 weeks.
Yep. Got to replace the main board. Got to update the firmware.
Like literally he had to there's a temperature sensor inside the oven, there's a assembly for where the gas comes out, there's a computer that he's going to replace the whole computer because that was bulging in a weird way. I was like, why is the computer bulging? He's like, I don't know, I'm just going to replace it while I'm coming. It's like, well, okay, that sounds good. And I was like, if you don't get it in this time, he's like, we'll probably just give you a new one because it's easier. And I was like, that sounds great.
Can you imagine what the cooling needs are, or maybe more to the point, how like industrially hardened the computer hardware in an oven has to be?
Well, I will tell you exactly how much it is, because when I bought the oven, the guy at the store was like, yo, don't run this at 550 degrees for a long time because it will literally melt the solder in the computer on the backboard of the thing. I was like, that seems like a design flaw. He's like, yep, if you're going to do it, just do it before the extended warranty's up. And I said, fantastic.
I have a suggestion. What if we stopped putting computers in everything?
Well, so here's the interesting answer to that is if you buy a $10,000 cooktop, like a Wolf or a Viking or something like that, they don't have a bunch of computer shit in them. They're all still manual.
Huh.
Yeah. So the manual, the Luddite answer is the expensive answer in this case. And if you want to buy like $1,000 range, it's going to have a bunch of computers up in the business.
Hey, who doesn't love paying more for less?
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. Hello.
Hello, Brad. This week's episode, a little bit of a potpourri because we've both done things in the real world this week.
Yeah. Posting a few hours late on Sunday this week because you were, instead of recording a podcast yesterday, you were out at Maker Faire.
I went to Maker Faire with my daughter. This is the first. I was thinking about this while I was driving over there because it was on. What's the island in Vallejo where the first naval base was?
Not Alameda.
No, it's not Alameda. It's the other one. It's the one where the first naval base on the Pacific was.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Anyway, it's May Island or something like that.
Not Angel.
No, Angels. There's Angels undeveloped. It's anyway, it was like an hour drive. It was 50 miles. And this is the first Maker Faire that's happened since we started recording this podcast, because they canceled the 2021 for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And then 2021 they canceled, and 2022 they just announced that they weren't going to do any more Maker Fairs. Oh, and then like June of this year, they were like, "Hey, we're doing Maker Faire.
Just kidding.
It's going to be smaller." So
why did they initially say that it was just done?
I mean, Make also publishes a magazine, and I'm going to suggest that maybe the lack of, like, I think those two businesses kind of fed each other in a way that maybe they were having business problems.
I see.
And had to do some restructuring in order to survive the lack of the mothership Maker Faire, which brought a couple 100,000 people to San Mateo, usually one weekend in May.
Jeez, that's pretty serious attendance.
It was big. It was only 120,000, but it was a lot of people.
I mean, that's E3 is kind of my common point of comparison, but that's bigger than E3 ever was.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to those fairgrounds for like a county fair or whatever, it's big. Like it's a big fairground. There's like 3 or 4 big huge warehouses that were full of stuff, like indoor stuff and computers and stuff like that. And then there were also like a couple of huge outdoor areas that had like, crazy bicycles where they set gearing systems up on them so that the handlebars made the wheel turn the wrong way, and you had to like rewire your brain to ride a screwy bicycle. Or like a bunch of people would bring like burner cars and stuff that they take, like Burning Man sculptures and stuff like that would come. So anyway, I was very excited when I found out the Maker Faire was back. We used to cover it. We started covering it the first year of Tested in 2010. We went every year. We went to the New York one a couple of times. It's one of my, I always said it was my favorite event of the year, and it absolutely is, because it's such a good wide range of people who are enthusiastic about stuff that even if I'm not personally enthusiastic about it, their enthusiasm is infectious and it's cool. And it's mostly just people who build cool shit. Yeah, like even the brief description you've just given me is completely counter to what I thought it was, because like being in the office with you guys back the first couple 3 years you were doing it, my impression of what Maker Faire was, if you'd asked me, I assumed was just like a bunch of vendors showing off new 3D printers and CNC hardware and stuff like that. I didn't realize this is like totally grassroots DIY. Like, this sounds way more interesting and fun. Yeah, so it's I mean, there is that. Like, there's there's usually a 3D printer pavilion with a bunch of like in the early days it was MakerBot and like the 2 other printer companies and some open source weirdos, and I say that with love, just to be clear. And then as the years progressed, it was 30 different 3D printer vendors that were set up, and like a bunch of stuff around that. But it was big enough that was just like a small part of the thing. We would go, like, my favorite thing to do is just to walk around and look at the things people made, and like just so people understand the scale is, it's all the way up from like a kid, like the way you get into Maker Fairs, you either pay them money or you submit an application and say, hey, I have a project. Here's what the project is. Here's what state it's in. It's either most of the way done, it's all the way done, it's been done in like out in the world for a while, or it's in progress. And they'll give you anywhere from like a section in a 10 by 10 booth to like these kids used to build fully 3D motion simulators for flight sims out of like, I mean, just to be clear, they were children of parents who worked in Silicon Valley and probably made a bunch of money, and their parents spent a lot, but it was like the computer club for their school. Yeah. And they would build this huge thing, and they'd bring it to Maker Faire and the Science Museum over in the East Bay and a couple other places. And I like all those kids ended up going to MIT and Caltech and stuff like that. So like, it's a really wide range, and like some of the best stuff I've seen, like there was a seventh grader who made a mag-lev train, like an electromagnetic mag-lev train out of Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and stuff like that.
Wow.
And it was basically like the acceleration system for like a roller coaster or for the mag-lev trains in Japan or Germany or whatever, that he just rigged up with some electromagnets and some like some train tracks and stuff. It was really cool.
In microcosm, obviously, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
How big was it? Like kind of electric, like model train size? Or?
It was a small scale model train that he used as the frame, and the track was probably like 6 feet around or something. It wasn't particularly like, it wasn't enormous.
How fast did it go?
It did not. It went. To scale, it was very fast. In the real world, it was, it was cool that it worked. Like that was the neat thing was that he made it work and go around corners and stuff. Cause like it's relatively easy. Like you can make a mag-lev system with some neodymium magnets that like will take you a half hour to build. But the fact that he had it going around corners and stuff was pretty awesome, I thought.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Like I certainly don't have the aptitude or skill set, but like just thinking conceptually about what it would be like to like write the routines to drive the magnets and stuff like that, like conceptually taking those principles and expressing them through code and everything.
The point of the whole thing is that actually you probably do have the skill set to do that. Like when you get down there and you start, the thing that I told my daughter yesterday going, this is the first time she's gone that she was probably really old enough to ask questions for the people there. It's like, look, the people here, you don't have to be shy around these people. If somebody brings their stuff to Maker Faire and has it set up and they're standing there next to it, they're there because they love talking about it and they love to share that information. And if you have questions about it, you should just ask them. And like, people are very giving. Like I talked to a guy who makes these laser cut wooden clocks about how he was putting designs on them. He's like, oh, we originally just did decals and painted them. And then we were doing this and this and this. And then finally, when we started selling a certain number, we were like, we should just buy an industrial inkjet printer and figure out how to print directly on the wood. And like, it was like, so that is that dude's business. And he was like, here's how I do it.
Interesting.
Right?
I was going to ask, are there people there that are making full-time livings from? Is that his full-time thing or is that a side hustle? I
didn't ask him if it was full-time. My guess is it's probably the kind of thing that's like the dangerously on the cusp, as I think you're aware of. You and I have a unique perspective on that. Because it's like, if I really hustled, I could probably make this work. But then what if people stop buying 3D printed wood clocks for whatever reason?
You definitely in that position start getting into calculations of like, okay, it's maybe not quite a living, but how much time am I putting into it? Right. It's a return on time investment kind of calculus at that point.
Yeah. So there's that kind of stuff. There's a lot of like crafty stuff. There's like people that are making cookies and selling cookies, like like small scale commercial homemade cookies, basically.
Science cookies?
Just cookies.
Oh,
like they're just like, there's a mixture of stuff that you find at the fair and like the county fair, and then also like maker stuff. So there were like people that were building kits to do different electronic stuff, and they were selling those kits on the site. So you could buy a little bag that had everything you need to make like an LED Christmas tree ornament that you could solder at home, or even solder it there if you wanted to sit down and wait in line and take a soldering station. They do like learn to solder tent was always a really popular thing, where they bring like kids as young as like 3 or 4, and they sit them down and they teach them the right way to solder and how to be safe and all that kind of stuff.
That is awesome, because soldering is something that's just arcane enough that ideally you would want to talk to somebody who really knows what they're doing. Like I managed to fumble my way through a few PlayStation 1 mods 20 years ago, and I can solder like speaker wire or whatever back together. But like talking to somebody who really knows what they're doing and getting to use like their nice stuff, that's invaluable.
Well, they were doing like through hole soldering on PCBs. So like they were learning how to actually do like the kind of soldering you would use for a real project. Yeah. There's a lot of like college classes and clubs that are bringing their demos. Like one local college, I can't remember which one, I think it was Davis, but I'm not 100%, had brought a sand table that was like so it was like a big table full of sand that was all mounted up, and then they had a Kinect camera hanging up above it about 5 feet in the air that measured the depth of the sand, and then a projector that projected a topographic map on top of that, so you could sculpt the sand to look like mountains and stuff, and then you could hold your fist above it to make a cloud that would make rain fall on the sand. You could see how water would run down the side of the sand, and it would fill up the projection with a representation of water where the water was holding, where there were lakes and ponds and stuff. stuff. And like, we just sat and played with that for like 15, 20 minutes. It was like, as my daughter said, this is really chill. This is like an ASMR video, but we're in this big thing.
Wait, did she say it was like an ASMR?
Kids like ASMR videos, Brad.
Oh my God, the kids know about ASMR.
The kids know. You have no idea what the kids know about it all.
The kids created ASMR, probably.
I don't think it was the kids that created ASMR.
Actually, you know what? Let's not get into. Anyway, this sounds like the world's biggest science fair, actually, which.
It kind of is, yeah. But then there's also other stuff. There's like there are people that there was a back section with industrial arts people where there were like potters and glass blowers and metal workers that had little portable forges set up and were like basically kind of there advertising their hey, you can learn to be a potter, learn to be a metal worker, or learn to be a glass blower at my studio if you want to come take lessons in my studio. And that was fun, because then the side effect of that is that they're standing there blowing glass all day, and you get to watch people blow glass all day, which is really fun.
This is weird tangent here. Having downloaded a bunch of HDR demo content for my new TV, glass blowing looks amazing. Because a lot of that HDR, so there's a bunch of glass blowing in some of the HDR demo videos I downloaded. It just looks incredible to watch somebody do it. Like both the bright glowing aspect of it and just the really fluid motion of shaping the glass and everything. It's very nice to watch.
I think I've recommended this on podcasts, maybe not this one before, but if you haven't watched it, there's a show on Netflix called Blown Away that's a Canadian reality show in the kind of vein of Great British Bake Off, where like the hosts are kind to people instead of being mean, and it's like an uplifting experience. Because if you watch it starting from the beginning, the first season, it's very clear that like there was productions that was like, we got to make these people fight with each other, got to make it really angry and really super dramatic. And then like 2 episodes in, they realized that the mere act of blowing glass was dramatic enough, because like touching it on something that's not nuclear hot will make it just explode.
Yikes.
That it was dramatic enough on its own, and they could be kinder and gentler to the glass blowers. And it's totally worth watching if you're curious about it, because you'll learn a lot about glass blowing, if nothing else. So yeah, like it was there's all sorts, there's like a lot of sculpture stuff. There's a lot like, and okay, so this is an important note. The different maker fairs have different tenors based on where they are. So like the San Francisco one has a lot of burner stuff, stuff that people take to Burning Man, like little cars, electric cars that are designed to drive around the desert, and big metal sculptures that shoot flames and stuff like that. When we went to the one in New York at the Queens Fairgrounds, for Men in Black, they had a bunch of people from the New England technical colleges. So there was a ton more robot stuff and drone stuff, and like the technical high schools in New York would bring teams that had done projects. Like there was a high school in Brooklyn that the kids wanted to do a flight club, like a remote controlled airplane club, but it was too expensive, because like the typical, like for somebody learning how to fly remote controlled airplanes, the circle of life is that you spend 100 hours building the plane, you take it out, you fly it for 4 minutes, you crash it, and then you spend 100 hours fixing the plane. And like they couldn't make that work on a school system. So the kids instead engineered like a flying wing design that was just a cheap foam wing with ailerons on the 2 wings. And like 2 little basic servos and an electric motor that would power the flight. And it was like a $50 flying aircraft, so they could learn to fly on the cheap, and then have a path up to that didn't involve spending hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars building airplanes that would just be destroyed.
That's very cool.
So yeah, so like we saw the industrial arts demos, we looked at the burner cars, we got to climb into the burner cars, which is kind of nice because it was a little smaller. We looked at some of the big sculptures. There's a huge Ori there. An Ori is like a representation of the solar system that the planets move at the right rates, maybe not like 1-to-1, but like a scale speed of the rates of movement. And that was big enough it fit in like a warehouse. It was like it was huge. There was like a big scale Lego build that if you wanted to sit down and just build some Lego, they were building, I think, a Typhoon class nuclear submarine. The R2D2 and BB-8 and Chopper builders clubs were there in force.
Are those people trying to like replicate the props exactly, or is it more like riffs on R2D2?
Little from column A, little from column B. There's definitely people that want to make like film accurate Like, for example, there are 2 different colors of blue used on R2D2 depending on which movie you're trying to replicate, right? Yeah. There's R2D2s that have like the prequel arms and all the stuff that pops out of the front. There's R2D2s that have a lightsaber hole in the top that'll shoot a lightsaber out. There's periscope R2D2s. There's some combination of the others. There's like somebody made it's funny. People used to make pink and non-blue, different colorways of R2D2, and then the people at Lucasfilm who were making the Clone Wars cartoon took some of those and actually put them in the Clone Wars cartoon. So now the R2, the Bay Area R2 Builders Club's R2s are now, some of them are canonical. Let's see, they did this is the first time I've seen a chopper in person. Chopper is the robot from Rebels, and I think it might be the first time. I don't know if this is the case, but I know that one of the guys who was one of the big R2 Builders original guys built the chopper that they drove around Disneyland to promote Rebels when it was new 8 years ago, whatever.
Oh man, I just looked at that thing is a true trash can.
Chopper is like if R2D2 is chaotic good, Chopper's chaotic evil.
Yes. Chopper's
real good. But yeah, so the R2D2s are just driving around. The R2D2 that was cruising around, they take turns going around the fair, and like, because turns out children love R2D2. He's the same height as them. He beeps, he whistles, he spins, he's exciting.
I assume they build pretty decent speaker systems into a lot of these.
Oh, almost always. Like the thing about the R2 Builders Clubs is they've been doing it for a long time now, and there's multiple generations of plans. There's like fully analog ones that you would have built like 10 years ago that have a lead acid battery. The more modern solid state ones are lighter and a little bit easier to operate and can do more stuff.
Sorry. It's just that whole scene of like the really authentic movie prop replication scene is so fascinating to me, because like you have to be so exacting in a lot of details, and also like, there's some kind of mystique to seeing something that you've seen on screen in a fantasy setting suddenly right in front of you. Like it's a cool thing.
Having it be real in front of you is pretty amazing. And
there's like a power to that.
And especially for the little kids, right? The little kids, it is exciting for me, but watching
kids,
watching little kids hug R2D2 is very good.
Yes.
And those guys have gone like those are the people that originally, like they were one of the early prop replica things, right? The R2 Builders Clubs have been going for 40 years now. Whoa. And it's like, it's a thing where the mechanisms by which they build those, it's too much specialized hardware for one person to kind of make all of it in less than like a 10-year period. So they do runs where one person is like, okay, I'm going to machine out a bazillion of the bearing that the head spins on. And one person's like, I'm going to make 50 doors, and I'm going to make the feet, and I'm going to make this, and I'm going to do this. And
interesting.
You all, like, everybody, you send your money for the ring bearing to one guy, and then, or you trade your thing for the other guy. And like, it's a very much a community effort each time there's a run of those made.
So I was envisioning like each group had its own bespoke design that they came up with. I didn't realize it's like that standardized and distributed at this point. Is there a consortium defining the interconnects in your R2D2 unit?
I think everybody, like this, the thing is, at this point, because of microcontrollers and stuff like the Raspberry Pi, the internal stuff and honestly, the rise of drones has made the radio stuff a lot cheaper too. Like that stuff is a lot of personal choice, but like the bearing for the head is a really expensive piece because it's a big round circular bearing that's like 1.5 feet across, and it's a kind of screwy size. So either somebody has to make a bunch of them, or you have to find a supplier that will sell you 200 so you can get 50 for the group of people that are building at that moment. And just to be clear, people absolutely do still just go out and build it on their own over a long period of time. That's totally valid, whatever. But the larger, faster, easier way to do it is to work with a group of people doing a run and just put them together.
Man, I could have my own R2D2.
Brad, the thing that they do now, they used to use like RC controllers, like the big ones with the antennas and stuff to control them. But about 10 years ago, somebody started designing Wiimote style controllers that you could just hide in the palm of your hand. And they do like, it's basically the same idea. Do you know about the Stormtrooper blasters at Disneyland?
Oh,
So the Stormtrooper blasters have a bazillion little buttons on them, and they can kind of chord commands to make the speaker in their headset make them all have Stormtrooper voice. So they have like a palette of like 100 things that they can say, or 300 things they can say, that are controlled by hitting different, infinitesimally small switches on the blaster.
Interesting. And that has to,
combinations.
All be tactile, I assume, right? Like they can't. It's not like they can look down at their blaster to punch codes in. Like they have to probably learn some pretty sophisticated input scheme.
Yeah, it's a lot of memory, I'm sure. And so the R2 controllers are like that now. So like we were sitting there, my daughter was interacting with R2. I was looking around everywhere trying to find the dude that was controlling R2 to thank him. And I'm pretty sure it was a guy who's kind of standing off to the side looking at something else, but just kind of staying there. And he had an earpiece in. So I was like, he's listening to the people talking to R2 up close, and he's doing the remote control stuff with the controllers in his hands, and just driving around and doing R2 stuff. It was really cool.
That's very cool. I am on the official website of the R2D2 Builders Club looking for. Okay. They don't exactly have like a link to just like click here to buy kits necessarily, but I'm curious like how much it would cost to build your own whole ass functional R2D2.
You're talking thousands of dollars. It's a lot of bespoke parts and also probably 1,000, 2,000 hours. Like it's a lot of work.
Oh wow! Also, I'm looking like Make Magazine actually is like the second Google result for building one. The one they've got photos of here that they built is not distressed in any way. It is like pristine, like right off the factory floor. Seeing a completely clean new R2D2 is like a weird. It's hard to parse because you're so used to seeing that thing very like scored up and burned and stuff.
Well, he shows up clean in the movies a few times, like at the end of the metal scene in Star Wars, he's gotten a bath.
Sure.
But yeah, it's really cool watching the different ways people weather them and different ways people handle them. And then also like the Wally Club is building Wallies.
Oh wow, yeah.
Wally's a little trickier because his scale changes throughout the movie because it's animated and and Pixar cheats a little bit.
Yeah.
So there's basically a few different scales that people build at for Wally.
Also, there's like, I mean, I don't know how much this is replicated in the builds, but like there's a real like human facial expression aspect to that character that would be probably pretty hard to replicate mechanically.
Nope, you can do it.
Wow. Okay. That's cool.
It turns out the hard part is the treads.
Huh.
The treads were we did a video with I think Mike McMasters, maybe I can't remember. It might have been the other Mike whose last name I can't remember, who builds R2s and Wallies a long time ago, and he walked us through like the hard parts of the Wally. It turns out like it was interesting because being on the beginning stages of the Wally was way different than coming in late to the R2s, right? Where like the problems with R2 are well established and people know what they are. The problems with Wally were having to figure out, and they were having to do custom treads and all. Like it was all, because it was animated, it was all off the shelf stuff. I mean, it was all custom stuff rather than R2D2, which started out as a physical prop that was made with basically stuff that you could find in a hardware store in England in 1975. So anyway, while the builders clubs were there, they had some steam engines there, which was really cool. We got to ride a push cart. The kiddo and I got to ride like a railroad push cart and push the bars up and down, which I'd literally never seen that before.
Sounds fun.
And like a bunch of other, like there's like people bring stuff that they love. Like somebody had brought a bunch of like small scale motors and engines so you could see how they work. And it was a lovely, we spent like half a day there probably. So it's definitely smaller. Like the old Maker Faire, Norm and I would go and spend 2 days shooting video basically. And now this is a little bit smaller, but I think it's a good start. And the new venue is pretty nice.
Yeah, that's good that it came back. That sounds like something valuable to have. Did you see any like new bleeding edge hardware in like the 3D printer space or anything like that? Or like were the vendors even there? Or
well, there were a few people with 3D printers. I saw Raspberry. Eben was there. I didn't get to see him, but he was there talking about Raspberry Pi 5s. Yeah.
The thing when we talked to him earlier this year, I was, from the way he was talking, I assumed like at least a year and a half before a Pi 5. And then like 6 months later, here we are. Yeah,
there were a lot of people there. It was nice because it was smaller. It was a little harder to get to. So you were able to kind of see more stuff and you could talk to people more. We talked to Lisa Winter, who's a former BattleBot contestant, Robot Wars contestant, and I think is now a judge actually, who's working with this company Eliza Dolls that are basically building like their whole thing is, hey, like if you're a parent, you have a graveyard of STEM toys that you bought for your kid that they just didn't have any interest at all in. And they're building dolls for girls specifically, that you can do scratch coding. And like the dolls have microcontrollers built into the chest. You can hook up those microcontrollers to a bunch of different things and then do write scratch programs that you can blast over to the doll with Bluetooth from an iPad. Because they were like, well, look, we looked at what the kids have. We looked at what they like doing and like what they're doing on stuff like Roblox and things like that. And we wanted to give probably younger than my daughter, who's 10, but like 7-year-olds stuff to do that like mimics that same thing that I had when I was learning how to write C for Arduinos, which was, I wrote a program and the light changed color, which makes, like, it turns out making an abstract concept concrete is really, really valuable especially for early stages of learning this kind of like abstract problems like programming. So yeah, they're doing a Kickstarter later this year. But like other stuff we've seen, like we saw, Jerry Ellsworth brought her AR stuff there over the years. Like it's a place where the open ROV people brought underwater rover kits, like tethered underwater robots.
Wow.
Because they literally they were looking at what was happening with drones, and they were looking at it. They're like, hey, look, man, we could build underwater rovers that are
that's awesome.
A fraction of the cost.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Like there are places that you need expensive things to go to, like the bottom of the ocean. But also, if you want to just go into a cave in Mexico and explore the cave, you can buy something that's like not disposable, but like $1,000. You can build something that's $1,000 and is really effective at that.
Like, and at least down to a few dozen feet, probably.
Oh, way more than that.
If not
hundreds of feet. But yeah, hundreds of feet. They're disposable because you, like, if they get stuck in current or get sucked away and you get in a current that's faster than they can handle, you can't pull them back, right?
Sure. Or if you're exploring like some tight cave system or even a wreck, I don't know what the like legal aspect would be of like
fair game
diving a robot around a wreck, but like I could see all kinds of cases where the robot could just get hung up and become irretrievable.
Well, or even if you have like a pond with an overflow and you need to build a robot to like, you could use those to clear the duckweed that gets jammed up in the spillway of your small pond. So
I assume those must all be tethered, right? I think that like radio communication through water is basically a no-go.
Not good. Yeah, it turns out. So yeah, those are all tethered.
That's so cool. They put cameras on them and stuff, I assume.
Cameras, grabbers. So the way those rovers work is there's usually there's a body that's enclosed and watertight, and then there's like a cargo. There's two fins on the top that you can attach a tube to that you can put cargo on. That cargo can be either like grabbers and like nets to hold stuff. They can be cameras. They can be whatever you want. So and then you ballast it appropriately.
Yeah, that makes me think about we talked about the SS Ohioan. It's a shipwreck right off the coast of San Francisco.
Yeah, we talked about it a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Like we haven't been up there because it's really hard to time with low tide to actually get up there. Like last I checked, low tide was at like 6 a.m. or something. But B, the other thing is I found out that like the wreck is like far more degenerated than I thought it was. It's like, I think it's basically just like a pile of metal in the bay at this point. But like what you're describing makes me think about, and also I don't know what the park rangers would think about this up there. But like if you could just go up there on the beach and like feed that little robot into the water and like go explore around the base of that wreck and just look at stuff up close would be so cool.
Well, and they're obviously, you don't want to lose them intentionally, but because they're tethered but they get power from the shore rather than batteries. Like if you do lose a drone, it's not like you're leaking acid and battery goo into the water for 50 years after it gets lost in an underwater cave or something.
What kind of mobile power source are we talking about?
You have a long wire there's a data wire and there's a power wire typically.
Okay.
So you have it plugged into a big lithium ion battery
giant battery
or like boat, like a cigarette lighter adapter or something on the boat.
I guess a tiny robot really doesn't need that much power, even though there's a lot of mechanical stuff there.
Yeah. So but the smart thing about the open ROV design, and I don't think there was somebody else there doing open source underwater rovers, but I don't think it was the open ROV guys. My daughter wasn't interested, so we didn't stop and talk to them. But their whole thing was they wanted to do cheap off the shelf parts, which is why they were able to keep it under $1,000. And
this was a Kickstarter.
It was one of the first Kickstarters. It was early, like 2010 or 2011.
And here's their GitHub repo for all the software that runs on the robot.
Yeah, and they've built at this point probably tens of thousands of drones and sold a bunch of kits. And also if you have a laser cutter and the ability to cut acrylic and glue acrylic, you could just build one yourself. It's all open, right?
Huh. Wow.
It's just easier to support the project than it is to source the parts yourself. The Eliza doll, the Ori, it was for people who've gone to San Mateo Maker Faire for the big one. It's definitely smaller. It's a little bit more out of the way. But the tickets were also cheaper. So I was kind of works out. And it was a lovely way to spend an afternoon with my daughter. We had a good time, walked around. We bought a clock.
Nice.
Got a corgi clock. The corgi clock, the feet go back and forth. The tongue goes back and forth in the mouth. It's very good.
Seems like a good place to get a good novelty clock.
Yeah, it's just a nice, it's the kind of thing you go to and you get inspired by. Yeah. And because it's a smaller venue, they're doing it twice. So it's this weekend that we're recording this episode, that this episode's coming out. If you're in the Bay Area and you want to go, it's also going to be around next weekend too. And I think the thing I would tell you is if you buy tickets off site, they're cheaper, both parking tickets and the tickets to the event are cheaper than if you buy them on site. So you get your Eventbrite on if you're going to go. Great
that it came back. Since it sounded like it was just dead and then all of a sudden it wasn't.
I am beyond thrilled that it's back. And it's at I'm trying to figure out, it's Mare Island is what it is, not May Island. Sorry. Apologies.
All right. Get your island straight.
No,
I guess.
I don't know my Bay Area tiny island. It's a really small island. Brad, you want to talk about your PC stuff? We can get into
it a little bit. Yeah, we're just potpourriing it up here, and this has been on my mind the last couple of days. I'll talk about. I may do nothing here. Really? I've been having some issues with my AMD build over the last month. I clearly am not alone in that.
What kind of issues? Just out of curiosity.
Even on our Discord, the issues seem to be specific to the motherboard I'm using. I don't think it's an AMD problem.
Is it like crashes and stuff like that?
It's a weird combination of crashes and basically this is 10% of the time that I turn the computer on, because the other 90% of the time it's totally fine. It was totally fine 100% of the time from April to September, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, and this seems to be common to people running into this issue, things just start going to shit is the best way I can explain it, because it's never quite the same crash twice.
That's not what you want.
It's a combination of the machine may just never post, or it may post, and then this is the weird stuff. Parts of the system start sort of failing, whether it is Bluetooth or networking or USB or some combination thereof.
You just hear the doo-doo sound and it disconnects.
It's not that clean. It's not like Windows just suddenly doesn't see it. It's more I was in the middle of downloading something on Steam, and then the entire system seized up and started updating the screen about once every second. And then when I rebooted and looked at Event Viewer, I saw tons and tons of storage errors in the log, and also saw the Bluetooth device. I guess that's what I'm getting at. It's stuff where you need to dig into the event logs to actually see what failed in some cases. Although there have been other cases where the machine was more or less still responsive, but none of the input devices worked anymore because the USB had died.
Jesus,
it's just super random. And again, this is only maybe. I'm running into it at most. I think I've had it happen maybe 3-4 times in a week at most since this started about a month ago.
That's still a lot.
It's enough to be annoying, even though and this seems common to everybody. It's basically a situation where you just hard power off and turn it back on, and you're basically looking for a good boot. It's basically a crapshoot if you're going to get a good boot or a bad boot, and most of the time they're good boots, but when they're not, it's pretty catastrophic.
Is this for all the first wave boards from Gigabyte, or is this just one specific board has a bad rev?
So until today, it's been 100% looking on Reddit and me and one other guy on our Discord. It's all been the X670E RS Master, which I believe is the board that most people reviewed these CPUs on. So it was just pretty widespread, and I think probably a lot of people picked it up because it was the board people were using to review. Someone else on the Discord popped up with the same issues today that is using an RS Extreme, though, which is kind of same chipset and kind of same. It's not the same model. There are absolutely differences.
Same vendor, though.
Yes, same vendor, same chipset. This does seem like a Gigabyte issue. This does not seem like a widespread AMD issue. Does
it seem like a thing that they could fix with a firmware update?
That's my hope. That's my hope. But that's the other thing. They've been pretty slow on rolling BIOS updates out. It's been 3 months since the last stable BIOS.
Oof.
They put out beta updates, but I kind of am not in the running beta BIOS game anymore. But people on the Reddit who are using the most recent beta BIOS are having the same issues. So
still happens. Oh boy.
To be clear, this could be like 0.1% of the people who own this motherboard.
Yeah, but the fact that we've seen 3 people on our Discord have similar problems with the same. I mean, part of it, the sample skews high because you built a machine with that board and people probably followed. Yeah. I mean, I know specifically one of them said I bought this board because Brad built his machine with it.
Makes me feel terrible. I apologize for that. I mean,
but it happens. That happens.
So anyway, it's kind of a bummer. Anyway, like because this has been going on, like maybe they fix it in a BIOS update. I think I'm maybe willing to give it till the end of the year or something. And if it's not fixed by like January, I might be like, all right, enough of this.
Time to do something new.
Yes. So my options seem to be just replace the motherboard with a different vendor because this does not seem to be an issue across this entire platform. Or if I'm swapping the motherboard anyway, should I also just move to an Intel system instead?
Oh, giving it up.
Like this following on from the emulating CPU thing earlier this year is kind of a lot for this new platform.
The emulating CPU thing was relatively narrow, though, it seems like in retrospect.
Yes. Well, it was a systemic issue, but it was only manifesting in like burnt CPUs in a small number of cases. Yeah. But the voltage issues that were causing it were endemic. There were emergency BIOS updates rushed out because like basically everybody was handling voltage wrong.
Some CPUs just couldn't take the heat, is what I'm saying. If you had a weak CPU, then you got what you deserved.
Maybe the CPU just needs to go to the gym.
Yeah, just stop skipping leg day, CPU.
Yes. And anyway, now I may do nothing if this clears up. Although even like if it clears up for some couple of months, like am I ever going to truly trust this thing again? I don't know. And of course,
you ever really trust any computer, Brad? Yeah, that's the question actually, we all need to ask.
That's a very good point. And it's only because, this is not just my personal machine. It's also my work machine that this is such a dire thing. Like it needs to work.
It's funny. I was on Full Nerd with Adam and Steve from Gamers Nexus this week, and we were talking about what your benefit, what your reliability metric is. And he's like, well, if I mess up my computer, I can just go into one of the other computers in the office and use it, and it's no big deal. And I was like, yeah, that's nice. If I mess up my computer, I don't make money that week. And he's like, yep, that gives you a different kind of it's lost work. Any lost work is bad.
Yep. That's absolutely the case here. So anyway, yeah, like I said, I'm not sure I ever want to trust this board again, even if they do supposedly clear this stuff up. Although to date, there's been no indication they have been able to do that or will be able to do that. I should also mention there are people on Reddit who have RMA'd this board at least once, if not twice. And the replacements
still doing it.
And the replacements eventually manifest the same issues. And that's actually the weird thing is that it seems like in all cases, it takes some time for these things to start breaking.
That feels bad.
Yes. It's one of those nebulous, like, is this thing good? Is it going to continue to be good for another 2 or 3 years? Or is it just, yeah. So anyway, I might swap the motherboard. I might swap the whole thing. I'm not sure. I don't know that like you've had your issues with Intel. So it's not like Intel is perfect these days either, but
it's been like compared to the 9900K machine I built a few years ago, this machine has been frustrating. We talked about that on this episode too. Like it's between CPUs dying, memory dying, all sorts of other stuff. It's been everything's more complicated. So there's more points of failure. It seems
I guess that's what it is. Like combined with, just the calamity of the last 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Feels like things maybe are just at a rickety place right now. That said, 14th gen Intel stuff is coming out, and like this is an uncommonly long period for Intel to be on the same platform, same chipsets and socket and everything.
Yeah, so, 2 CPUs.
Right. So I'm actually thinking like, okay, if priority number 1 is for this thing to be as stable as possible, then this seems like even if it's an unexciting platform, it's probably the most mature and stable at this point.
Well, it seems like if you don't do stupid. Like I did stupid. I did hot rod memory. If it seems like if I hadn't done hot rod memory, I probably wouldn't have had problems with memory at least.
That actually would be an interesting aspect to this build is that I have an AMD Expo kit, memory kit. So like if I were to throw that, it would work. It would absolutely work. But
you'd have to set it up manually though.
Like the motherboard would probably, I'm quite sure, an Intel motherboard is not going to be able to read Expo profiles.
I wonder if it also has the XMP profiles. It doesn't, does it?
Doubt it, unless maybe there's some internal mechanism for like exposing both formats.
I don't know.
I doubt it. I highly doubt it.
That's Adam would know that answer. I don't know that one, unfortunately.
But I assume you could just settle the timings manually and be just fine.
Yeah, you can always set the timings manually and be just fine. It's just like there's at this point the number of memory timing settings it's gone crazy. From like voltage and clock speed to shit that I don't even understand, and I've been doing this for 20 years.
Like it was like it was clock, voltage, and like the four basic like CAS latency type metrics, and now there are like every board I've touched in the last 5 years exposes like 24 extra sub timings.
You got your strobe. You know what your strobe is, Brent? You know what your strobe to 2 latency is? I don't know.
The upside is that it feels like leaving everything on auto, like memory training has gotten pretty good. It feels like to me. Like I've had some cases. I've had some cases where I was able to solve memory instability stuff by just resetting everything to auto and letting the board figure it out.
Maybe. I haven't tried that actually.
So I'm not too worried about putting AMD memory in
my experience, when I set my board to auto, it goes to the JetX speed, which is always really slow.
Yes, that's what I had to do, was let it figure all that stuff out, and then I just bumped the clock speed. This is on an older build that I'm no longer using. But I think that memory would be fine.
And then after that bit, you have a thing that says water cooling, maybe.
Yeah. So that's the other weird thing I'm running into. Like one of the reasons I got this Gigabyte board is they're like basically the only vendor on the market who is still spacing PCIe slots, which I need all of out in such a way that you can use a big 3-slot
capture cards and NIC.
Yes, I've got the high-speed network card to go to my NAS, and I've got the video capture card.
Yeah.
Everybody generally is spacing the slots so that if you're using a 3-slot GPU, you can't use the second slot. It's just block. Right. And so that was part of why I picked this board in the first place. So if I swap to another board, that's most likely going to be an issue. So I could either get a smaller graphics card or I could just water cool the 4090. Which
I'm surprised that nobody's come up with a 2-slot 4090 at this point, honestly.
That might be something that'll happen eventually. I'm not going to say for sure, but I've heard maybe some, I don't know.
Okay. I would have thought it would have happened by now, but
it may have happened. Actually, I could.
But the water cooling is tempting. The only problem with the water cooling, so when I was at Max PC, I always had water cooled. I always built water cooling loops, mainly because there was just shit laying around, and I could idly put one together, and then there I was.
Yes, it's not cheap. I will tell you from looking at just even a cursory survey of what's out there. It's not cheap.
It's not even that, but like at Max PC, I had my home machine that was basically just for playing games at home, and then we had test beds at the office. So when I needed to test something new, I used the test bed at the office. I didn't have to tear down my machine at home to test stuff. And when we moved over to Tested, that changed. So. Like it stopped being practical when I had to, like if I was going to test a new video card or something, I would have had to tear down the water cooling loop in order to put a new video card in, which is just more of a pain in the ass than I was willing to deal with.
That's obviously a non-starter. I mean, my hope, if I did this, my hope is that I would get a combo of hardware that was solid enough that I could, knock on wood. I mean, I know this is never actually the reality, but like as close as possible to just put it all together and get it going and then not touch it for the next 2 to 3 years.
If like having looked at this stuff when I was going into the build for this machine, it seems like that's much more doable now. Like, especially if you have room for a couple of radiators and stuff like that, you can the all-in-one pumps with the reservoirs are more common and normal now. It used to be that you had to find a place to put a big giant water cooling column.
Have you heard how big my case is?
It's pretty, but I mean, it's. Yeah, you have plenty of. You can put all the radiators in the world. You don't have any problems.
This is pretty much why I bought the biggest case I could find, just to leave options for any and everything that could possibly happen.
I mean, you could fit a whole second computer in there if you spaced it out well.
Probably. I was looking
some holes.
I was looking at the manual yesterday. I think you can fit. Gosh, what was it? You can fit a 360 millimeter, a 280 millimeter, and a 420 millimeter radiator all in this case at one time. If you're willing to, like, that's with no optical drive. That's with that's the maximal water cooling setup, but it's like absurd the amount of surface area you can put in this thing.
Do people even make 420 millimeter radiators now?
Yes, they do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's less of an issue these days, and like you can do the all-in-one pumps with the reservoir on a self-built kit, so you don't have to have the big reservoir if you don't want to.
Yeah,
it's all more manageable.
You tell me my impression of the point of the reservoir from like 2 hours of looking at the stuff yesterday. Seems like an easier way to get water out of the line as it runs.
Air out of the line, yeah.
Or sorry, air. Yes,
yeah,
is what I meant. Sorry. Well, yeah, bleed the air out as it runs, and B, it sounds like the more liquid in the loop in general, kind of the more efficient the cooling, or the better the cooling.
Well, the trick with water cooling is that the liquid has higher heat capacity, right? So it both transmits heat easier and it holds a lot of heat. So yeah, like if you have an extra half liter of water in your reservoir, that's 80 calories per degree Celsius of energy. Or something like that. So like, yeah, it's your holding capacity for heat in that loop will be more the more liquid you have in there.
Yeah, that sounds appealing to me. I talked some thanks to RoboJeff on the Discord, talked to him some yesterday about this stuff. And yeah, and he basically said like the more you overbuild the heat capacity, the quieter the whole thing will be, obviously, because the fans don't need to run as hard. So
well, yeah, because
that sounds appealing.
Like the trick is it takes 80 calories of heat per gram of water per degree Celsius, right? To raise the temperature at 1 degree Celsius. So that means like you literally, it will take longer for the whole loop to raise the temperature, which means it'll take longer for your fans to spin up, because presumably if you do this, you have a way to measure the liquid temperature, and that's what you set your fan curves to for the radiators. Right. And then yeah, it's a nice way to do it. The trade-off is that machine essentially is a you're not going to change that, and you're never going to have the brand new video card, because it always takes them 6 months to make new water blocks for the new video cards.
Yes, the machine would become kind of a fixed point in time.
Yeah, which is fine. The way you use computers, it totally works.
Yeah, like I just need this thing to go for the next 2-3 years, especially like Intel is going to ride out this tile transition. Like AMD's got its issues. Like it would be nice to have something just kind of old and reliable until everybody sorts their stuff out. This is a big hierarchy of maybes. Yeah. Like, am I even going to swap the board? If I do, am I going to actually have these cooling issues? If that's the case, am I going to water cool? Like, it's a big maybe to all of it, but it's fun to think about. And
well, if Gigabyte gets their shit together and gives you a firmware update that fixes the problem, then
I mean, if they unequivocally come out and say, "Hey, we have identified this issue and fixed it in this BIOS update," then
yeah,
like anything short of that, I feel like I don't know. I mean, even if they didn't say that, if I made it 6 months without a crash, maybe then I would feel okay. But
I'm sorry you've had such a problem with it. Like that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is maddening, because it's like the computer's gaslighting you, and you don't know whether it's you or if you've done something wrong, or if like, yeah, it's hard to deal with.
I will deal with problems all day long when it's clear what the problem is and what to do about it. But when it's this nebulous, invisible, like something is just, yeah. I think you may have actually had worse issues than I have so far.
I mean, the memory dying and the CPU memory controller conking out were annoying, but not like that. It was easy to fix, because it was just like RMA and get the new hardware, and then you're back in business.
Sure. Anyway, anybody in the Discord wants to hit me up about water cooling stuff, maybe that would be fun to talk about.
There you go. I bought something stupid a couple of weeks ago and put it in and set it up. So I have in my computer a bunch of fractal fans, aspect fans, that have RGB, and they're plugged directly into headers on the motherboard for the fans side. But the RGB, I had them daisy chained because they're set up to do that. But when you daisy chain these fans, they're daisy chained in parallel, which means each of the fans has like 6 LEDs on it. But when you daisy chain them, instead of seeing 3 fans on a chain, you don't see 18 LEDs, you see 6 LEDs, and then all of the fans mirror each other, basically.
Right.
I wasn't able to get the smooth transitions from front to back and top to bottom on my radiators and my fans that I wanted with that. So I looked at, I've been using OpenRGB to control the lights on the computer for a while. OpenRGB is nice because it uses open source interfaces with the hardware, so you don't have to install all of the software that the vendors ship. So I don't have like Razer Chroma and ASUS's thing and all the different bullshit on the computer. I just have this one piece of software.
We may have said this exact thing before, but it sounds like it's basically Home Assistant for RGB.
It is very similar to Home Assistant in that it works without having to have. Sometimes Home Assistant has to have the other stuff installed someplace, though, just for the record. But yes, it is very similar ethos. The idea is that you could just install this one piece of software and it'll see all of your RGB stuff. So I bought a OpenRGB compatible light controller which is a Razer Chroma. They do one that has fan control and USB, and one that's just USB. I bought the just ARGB. I bought the just ARGB one. Plugged all of the fans directly into that thing, and then I was like, okay, how do I actually make this work? And it turns out the best way, because the fans are spread usually in a like a hexagon shape around the edge of the fan hub, the hub of the fan inside the hub. The best thing to do was to look at each fan and identify each of the LEDs and then place them relatively where they are in the vertical height or the horizontal height of the fan. And I did all that, and I put them. I represented them in the map, the visual. Our OpenRGB has a plugin that lets you make like a 2D visual map of all the lights in the computer. And I did them as linear, either horizontal or vertical lines. So now when I start with a gradient at the bottom of the case and go to the top, I get like smooth transitions from blue to purple to green to purple to blue to green to purple to green to purple. Yeah. It's super sick. Now, that wasn't, I wanted to make it more difficult.
Of course.
And I looked at my drop control, which I had kind of cheated, and I just built a color profile for it that matched but wasn't synced up with the case. And somebody's released QMX firmware for the drop is a 10 keyless mechanical keyboard with RGB wired. And somebody released QMX firmware, and I built a QMX firmware for my drop with all my shit on it that has OpenRGB support, because there's a QMX plugin for OpenRGB now, and now OpenRGB can control the lighting on my QMX keyboard, which I didn't think was ever going to be possible because of overhead involved in real time.
Huh.
And then I went one step further. Yeah,
I feel like this is leading somewhere.
So then I went one step further, because I've been playing a little bit of Counter-Strike 2 lately, and that's a game that has some fancy keyboard shit going on. And I looked at Artemis and Aurora. If you don't know what Artemis and Aurora are, Aurora has been around for a really long time now, but it's a open source interface for your RGB keyboards and mice and headsets and all of that stuff to let you kind of so in the world of RGB keyboards and mice and nonsense, every manufacturer has their own APIs. And like for a long time, they would do exclusive deals. Like Logitech would be the WoW vendor, and Razer would do Counter-Strike and blah blah blah. Aurora just gives you open source wrappers for all the other hardware vendors. Okay. So that like your RGB keyboard from Logitech or Corsair or Razer, whoever works with all the other game APIs. The guy who ran Aurora for a long time has taken a break. So somebody forked off that project, has been working on it on a separate fork called Aurora RGB for a couple of years now. So if you haven't had an Aurora update in a minute, you might want to check and switch over to the new fork, because it's well updated. And that new fork has an OpenRGB API hook. So OpenRGB runs a server, an API server, and you can just connect apps into it. So now I can run my Counter-Strike bullshit and my Fortnite bullshit, and I can run it on just the keyboard, or alternately, I can make it take over the entire case and do all sorts of buck wild stuff in the case when like I'm dancing in Fortnite or I get a kill in Counter-Strike or whatever.
First of all, I'm going to say real quick that I did not have on my 2023 bingo card Will becomes an RGB guy necessarily.
I mean, technically that would be a 2022 card, but it's the RGB stuff's really fun. I didn't expect to like it, but I don't know.
I get it, I guess. Is your machine in the shot when you're streaming?
It is not, because my cables aren't long enough. That's the next. So, okay, two things.
Because like if you're streaming, especially as much as you stream Fortnite, for example, if you were to integrate those things in a way that people could see them, then I guess I actually kind of see the point.
So there's two notes to that. One is that I have a face condition that sometimes gives me a gnarly face rash. I haven't had the camera on in like a year, maybe 8 months at this point.
Wow. Wait, you mean you can just stream without a camera now?
So I also was getting a lot of "Why are you playing Fortnite, Grandpa?" comments from the kids when I was playing Fortnite. The not streaming with the camera on knocked both of those way down.
Sure.
At some point, I wouldn't mind having I have a space behind me to put a shelf with the computer on it. And I wouldn't mind having the computer back there where it's actually visible, because it actually looks, it looks like it's gratuitous and full of RGB bullshit, but it looks cool. It's a sick RGB bullshit at this point. At some point I'll probably set the camera back up and do that. But for right now, it's just me and my business on the floor underneath me.
Well, let me ask real quick. Is there any actual utility to the game specific profiles for the keyboard? Like, is it actually lighting up specific keys that are valuable in that game?
Depends on the game. So like Fortnite, I think it just plays an animation on the keyboard when you're dancing that's like timed to the music of whatever the emote is. The I want to say like Apex and League of like the old RTS ones would have all the keyboard shortcuts highlighted. So if you like press control, you can see what different options are available to you. So when you're learning key presses and stuff.
Yeah, that's cool.
League of Legends and Dota do the same thing. Battlefield had different modes highlighted based on what's going on in the game. It really is up to the game vendor how much stuff they expose. Like we talked to a couple people about doing that for the Anacrusis when we were launching. We were like, I don't think it's worth the effort, because it would have taken an engineer a while to figure it out. And also there's an information hierarchy aspect to it that you have to kind of like it needs to make sense, I guess. The other thing I learned as a result of this is that the people who originally worked on Aurora, when the main developer of Aurora took the break, forked off and made this new thing called Artemis that's all layer based and is much, much more powerful, but still pretty early. It also has an open RGB API hook in, so you can control all your open RGB stuff with it. And it seems really, really cool. They have a plugin infrastructure for building new integrations. So if the game has a mod or a hook, like Terraria has mods, so you can build a mod that hooks into that and feeds the information to the keyboard thing, and then you get like full keyboard highlighting in Terraria. Like some of them flash when you take damage. Some of them, like it's there's an aspect to it that's kind of cool, but like also it's mostly for show. It's mostly just because it's cool more than useful.
It's both. It's useful, superfluous bullshit.
The one that's the noteworthy good one is the Overwatch one, where everybody has different keyboard shortcuts. All the characters have different keyboard shortcuts, and it highlights all of them. But it also changes to the color of like your character's skin, so you know that you're playing Diva or whatever when you load it up, because it gets all pink and shit. Just in case you forgot which character you were playing, who was on the screen at all times. Yeah, in case you had your eyes closed or were just looking straight down at the ground, you know. So yeah, that's it. The OpenRGB compatible QMX firmware is on the OpenRGB page now, and it was a little scary because there were a couple of messages that were like, yo, if you make too big a firmware and you try to flash it, it's going to brick your keyboard. So be careful. But I didn't brick my keyboard. And, and also, by the way, we don't know how big the maximum size for this keyboard is. So, be careful. And then I used the drop keyboard firmware updater with that third-party firmware I made, and it worked just fine. And it presumably would have warned me, I guess. I don't know. Cool. Yeah. All right. So that's it. That's a potpourri, I guess. Yeah. Just in time for me to not quite start thinking about mechanical keyboards again. I think if we had talked for about another 30 seconds about it, I might have started looking at keyboards. Did you see the 8BitDo Famicom one? That is the reason. That's been several months now, I think. It's out now. You can buy it. Oh, did it just actually come out? Yeah, it's actually just an announcement. When I saw that thing get announced a few months ago, like that was the thing that got me back in hard of having a very hard time resisting having a keyboard in the original Famicom color scheme. It has the kata on the keycaps, and also you get the two big AB buttons if you get the Famicom version and not the NES version. I did see some people kind of annoyed that the kana on the keycaps doesn't actually correspond to like the is it like shift gist or like what's the encoding people? Is that still what people use to encode Japanese? I'm not sure. Anyway, apparently they don't actually correspond to the right keystrokes for those characters, which is a little bit that's stupid, questionable. Okay, I'm like 20% less entranced with
yeah. But like the cool thing about modular keycap sets is you could kind of actually just build your own color scheme of that, right? Which is probably what I would do.
I wish that I hope that this sells well. I'm not going to buy one of these, but I hope that it sells well enough that they make a SNES version with the Japanese SNES colors in a couple of years.
Okay, yeah.
I would be into that.
Japanese SNES is mostly just 2 tones of gray unless you're getting the little 4-color.
I want the 4-color.
Yeah, if you integrate the 4-color logo stuff somewhere, then that would look cool.
Yeah, I specifically want the 4-color thing.
There's something about that combination of maroon and beige and gray from 80s that was very common in 80s.
Does it speak to you?
Japanese computers and the Famicom. That is just yes. Anyway, let's wrap here before I try to go spend money on something.
It's only $99. That's a pretty good deal for a mechanical starter keyboard for what it's worth. It's Bluetooth too, Brad. It has a physical switch to turn it from 2.4G to Bluetooth and off. And the red light lights up in the corner to let you know it's on if you buy the Famicom version.
I'm making a face.
It's a good face. That's I need a new keyboard face.
What if I make my thank you patrons face?
Well, so I was going to say, I almost bought it just to hook up to the Mister.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Anyway, the thank you patrons face is where we say at the end of every episode, thank you patrons.
Yes, with a big smile. We can't see it, but
we're always happy to hear from you all. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Brad Will Made a Tech Pod is 100% a listener supported show. So if you would like to help us make the show, we don't run ads or anything like that. If you would like to help us make the show, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, that is patreon.com/techpod. And the internet tells me I have to say that 3 times. So I'm going to say it one more time. You should go to patreon.com/techpod. And for $5 a month, you get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord full of people talking about things like busted ass gigabyte motherboards and mechanical keyboards. And I don't know. I was talking about my RGB stuff the other day. Like we check in, we learn stuff. Everybody helps each other. It's a lovely community.
Talking to people who are running Asahi Linux on their brand new M2 MacBook Pros this morning.
That's madness. Absolute madness. And you also get access to the patron exclusive episode where we talk about it's kind of different things. Sometimes it's a ramble about whatever we're thinking about upcoming episodes. Sometimes it's spillover content from the questions episode at the end of the month. Sometimes it's just like things we think are cool.
Yeah.
And you go to patreon.com/techpod. We like to thank all of our patrons, but especially our executive producer tier patrons, including Nick Johnston, Paddle Creek Games Makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett. This one's just $ now. Wedge says join the TechPod holiday gift swap. That's in the holiday tech swap channel in the Discord if you would like to join that. Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. I did not see them at Maker Faire. I did look, so it's possible I missed them, but
that would have been an interesting rendezvous.
It was weird at Maker Faire, I will say, because I mean, not weird, but it's funny because I wouldn't expect people to recognize me at this point, having not made videos in 8 years. And a bunch of people said hi. I walked in front of some guy's shop while he was taking a picture and didn't realize it. And I said, I'm sorry. And he said, it's no problem, Will.
Rookie mistake.
And my daughter looked at me and she was like, did you know that guy? I was like, no, I had no idea who he was. Must be a listener or viewer or whatever. So it's always nice to see people. We had met a couple of people and their kids. It was really fun. So thanks for supporting the show, everybody. We appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.
And we will be back next week with another edition of the Tech Pod. See you then.